Welcome to the For Real Though Show, the podcast with a purpose for the peoples. I am your host, Christopher Keith. Thank you for joining us. As we always like to say, like, subscribe, do all the things, and we definitely appreciate it. So today we're going to do a little bit of a follow-up of what we did last week. We did get some feedback, some interesting feedback, I thought, and I'm not surprised by that at all, just by the subject matter. But we were talking about love and is love unconditional? And so we got some good feedback, both on the YouTube channel and outside of the YouTube channel where I got some feedback personally. And I believe there's some like kind of questions and ambivalence of wondering, okay, so if love is so unconditional, then why do things fall off the way they do? And I think that that's an excellent question. It's definitely something to look into, because we kind of repeat cycles over and over again and don't really know what's going on. I know, again, that has kind of been my pattern because nobody ever really taught us this stuff. You know what I'm saying? Nobody's teaching you this stuff. So, you know, personally, I think for me, I'm just trying to be curious about, my own experiences. And you try to be curious, I mean, for one, so you don't make the same mistakes over and over again, or especially if you've made them most of your life. And I'm going to reference some stuff in the Bible because I believe that a lot of my viewers are Christians, and even the ones that aren't necessarily, we grew up in the church, and so we understand some things that we've heard before. And I believe that the Bible has a lot of really great lessons, in it. So one of the things that it says is my people perish for lack of knowledge. And so I think that a lot of times we repeat stuff because we don't have the knowledge base. And so, we think we're doing one thing, but we're really doing another, for whatever reason. So so we're gonna follow up and talk about like after the love is gone, like what happens. And, just to kind of for a quick review, last episode we talked about love, and I hypothesized that, love, whether it's romantic or relational, it is unconditional. And as we said, we got a little pushback, which is good. One person in particular talked about the nuance when it comes to the word unconditional, as defined in the context of the video. And he didn't necessarily explain it, but I understood what he was saying. Like when you hear unconditional, certainly in our Western culture, our minds get real specific, and thinking unconditional means permission, to crap on somebody. Or in that context, it just seems oversimplified. And to a degree, it is simplified, right? But understand that this video, like the last one, it's like a 10,000 foot view of the subject matter, right? And if you've been on a plane, when you look at the ground, you look out the window and see the ground, you see a much larger view of the world, right? If you're over a city, you see cars kind of going to and fro, and they, kind of remind you of ants walking around. But you don't see any of the minute details of how the car is operating, what the drivers are doing or thinking, their overall condition of the car, like all these specific details of how and why a relationship, in love falls away are in the nuances, right? So that's not what we're doing here, So we got the 10,000 foot view, very, very general. And, with this backdrop again, you know, let's do a quick review. So I said that love is in its purest sense is unconditional. I said that if love is not conditional, then that means it's earned based on performance, meaning if I do good for you, you will love me. If I don't do well, then you won't, you know. And then we discussed that love is an action word, meaning it performs. It sounds like an oxymoron, but it isn't. Just love being an action word means it's going to do something. It's not just sitting there. So as we go on, remember the ground rules, 10,000 foot view, right? But this view comes with a bit of a caveat, okay? So again, we ain't talking about, if somebody cheated on you, in other words. We ain't talking about if somebody didn't take out the garbage, didn't pay for your drinks or your meal. We ain't talking about a particular argument you had where so-and-so talked about your mama or the size of your Johnson, right? No, there are situational reasons out there, that people fall out. And if we were to go there, this conversation, like it just wouldn't end, right? So, we're talking about the principle of love as being unconditional in of itself. And, in this context, I'm not talking about, in this context, I want you to understand first and foremost that I am talking about when I'm talking about people in love in this context, I'm talking about mature people. And when I say mature, I don't mean perfect, but I mean who are emotionally healed or healing, right? Who are self-aware and reflective, who are considerate and do not thrive on selfishness, okay? In other words, if your intentions are pure, though your actions may not always show up in a perfect fashion, then I'm talking about you, okay? And even in that way, we're still human and we can have great intentions, and those great intentions don't always lead to the best results, right? So we always still need to give space for grace, mercy, forgiveness, right? So maturity is the essential ingredient. And without that foundation, an immature person or an unhealed person, right, will move based on their feelings, whether those feelings are of happiness, joy, anger, stress, jealousy, or a host of other motivating factors. So if one or more persons in a relationship are operating on the initial premise of a basic foundation of maturity, then these treaties, right, they apply, right? And as a side note, a mature person isn't just someone who's mature today, right? They are constantly work to improve themselves. They're consistently working to get better. Nothing in this world stays stagnant, right? If it does, it dies. Still water runs deep, right? Shout out to the Four Tops. But that water remains, if that water remains still without a flow, it soon become infected and spoiled. If you don't believe me, hey, go take a bucket, fill it up with the freshest water you can find, take it outside, put it in the front porch or the yard, and let it sit there for a few days. Okay. Soon you will see that that water is nasty, or if the weather is warm enough, it's going to be a breeding ground for mosquitoes. So that's what happens when your spirit, your mind, your maturity, or your ability to navigate does not grow, then that's what happens to your quote unquote maturity. You get stuck. Okay. And a person's growth, it's not something that we have to obsess over, right? It's not something we should obsess over. Rather, maturity, it's just there. Like when you're searching to be better, it's just a gentle prod, you know what I'm saying? Encouraging you to always examine yourself, reevaluate your levels, right? And that's what I'm talking about. So going back to the Bible, if you've been in church, you probably heard the expression going from glory to glory, right? And it's kind of like describing a continuous progressive transformation of a believer, right, into the image of Christ, right? And depending on your age, you might not remember the black and white television, but I had one growing up, and there were no colors or anything to it. It was just like, well, I guess black, white, and gray is a color, but that's what you had, black, white, and shades of gray. And in the mid 70s, color TVs, they were more affordable. And if you had one in your house, trust me, it was a really big deal. Back in my day, the color TV was in my mama's room, right? And so, if you wanted to see Sanford and Son or something like that, or Good Times, you wanted to go see it in color, and not in the black and white that I had. Matter of fact, my black and white was like 13 inches too, so it was really small. Mama might have had like a 17-inch or 24-inch or something like that. And I don't know, I'm all over the place, and now I'm all on the color TV. But I'm getting to a point. I'm getting to a point. But so again, you got the color TV. And then after that, the technology continues to evolve, and then you got SD, standard definition. Picture was clearer, a little more defined than what we had before. And then we got HD, right? And each HD expansion, high definition, made that picture a little more clear, a little more spectacular. I remember watching a boxing match, and this guy, Hakeem Rockman, was fighting, and he got his eye got really messed up, like really, really blowed up from these punches. And it was like HD television, it was like one of the first times I had seen something in HD like that. And it was like, man, it was like looking at it in person, like you could really just see how grossed out it was. So, uh, yeah, anyway. So, but back in that day, we thought HD was nice. You know what I'm saying? HD was nice, right? And if you watch, I'm sorry, let me go back a little bit. Before we had the HD, we thought the SD was nice, right? So then you get the HD. And so, now, you look at it, now you got like uh 8K, right? We went 4K to 8K with all these different pixels and stuff. And that's just brightens the picture up even more. Okay, same way with sound, right? You had mono, you had high fidelity or hi-fi. That was a big deal back in the day if you had a hi-fi stereo system, right? And then from there, you got Dolby, where all the bass boom, and then you got digital Dolby sound, right? Now you got like DTS, that's the digital theater sound. So again, you're talking about progression, going from glory to glory, right? So my point is, in giving you those examples, that if your TV, your telephone, your vehicle, your computer, all of these things are evolving, right? So the question is, then why aren't you evolving? Why are you satisfied with having a black and white or SD level of maturity when you can continue to increase yourself, and continue to work on yourself so you could be on this 8K stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like again, that's just from glory to glory to glory. It has to be intentional. So now that we've established those rules, let's talk about what happens to love. Unconditional, but unsuccessful in terms of a relationship. So, as we talked about before, love, it's all good as it, standing on its own, you know, but the element of nuance, as my cousin mentioned to me, is that we should talk about, that I'm going to talk about in terms of why love falls off. I would use one word in particular to describe it. That word, wait for it, I'll spell it out. Favor. 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 Let's talk about favor. So, in describing favor, it means like approval, support, to prefer, right? Or to show a liking to someone or something, right? Showing a preference, a partiality, compared to others. Favor is not fair, right? It's not fair. It's favor, meaning like, this is set apart from others, right? And favor is another word for favor is liking, liking. And so as we expound on that, let's go to our scripture reference, right? Genesis 6 and 8, it says, "But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." Now, this was after the Lord, according to scripture, he was about to destroy man from the face of the earth. But notice it didn't say, "But the Lord loved Noah." You know what I'm saying? It didn't say the Lord loved Noah. Noah said Noah found favor, not love, favor. In another part, Genesis 18 and 3, it says, "O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant." Again, he didn't say if you love me, say if you got favor for me, right? In Samuel, it says, "Now the boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and favor with the Lord and also with man." So in the simplest terms, favor isn't about love. Favor is about like. Yes, like, believe it or not, is just as important as love is, you know. And I heard a man once say, shout out Louis Greenup Jr., rest in peace, my brother. He said, "Love endures, but like enjoys." Okay. I give you an example of in my own life, y'all know I'm the hardest working man in Columbus, so I got all these jobs and stuff. And one of my jobs is officiating basketball. So I was doing a youth game a couple months back, and I noticed this kid was playing on one of the teams. He might have been 10, 11 years old, I'm thinking, something like that. Well, anyway, cool little dude. You could tell he was the best player on the team. He really, really, really worked hard. And he had a really hot temper, because he was so intense and so into the game, right? And so, whereas normally, like I call a foul on him, and he didn't like it, and so he would go, and just kind of spaz out. And like in many occasions, I might look at the kid, I'll be like, okay, watch yourself, calm down or whatever, to try to keep him under control and everything. And with this kid, because I saw like he wasn't upset at me. He was upset at the situation. You know what I mean? Like he really just wanted to win so bad. He was competing so hard. So I just kind of took a liking to him, right? I had favor on him. And with that favor came a lot of patience, more patience than I would have given some other kids or who had said and done maybe less than what he was doing. And so that favor that I had from him, because I was just like, man, I like this kid. I liked his aggressiveness. I liked the fact that he cared so much. I liked the fact that he was so into it and so committed to it. Right. So after the game, I pulled him to the side. And I don't do this a lot, but every now and then I'll do this. I'll pull him to the side, and I introduced myself, and I already knew his name because his name was on the back. And the way I address the kids, if they got their name on their back, I always say Mr. So and so. So if it's Mr. Wilson, could you hand me the ball? Thank you, Mr. Wilson. You know what I'm saying? Well, hey, good job, Mr. Jones. But I do that. That's how I do. I model respect so they can know to model it back. But so I pull this kid to the side, and I'm like, hey man, listen. Your passion is like a fire. This is not something I came up with, but it's something I've heard before and use it myself. I say, hey man, your passion is like a fire, and it's beautiful. I said, remember, a fire can burn for you in terms of warming yourself to go after your opponent, or it could just burn you up and burn the whole situation up. And I said, so you have to ask yourself, based on your behavior and how you react when things go right or when things go wrong, especially who and what is the fire burning. So I just want you to remember that. And so he was like, yeah, yeah, okay, okay. He was kind of half-ass listening, you know what I'm saying? But the point is just, I'm gonna plant the seed regardless of whether you really receive it or not. Fast forward a couple weeks later, I had him again, you know, and he started spazzing out. And I don't know if he remembered me particularly, but again, kind of like during the game, we had a little break, in the action, we had a foul that was called, and I walked up to him, hey, 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 remember, who is the fire burning? And so from there, he kind of was like, oh, okay, 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 okay. And then, he went on to still be super competitive, still be super into it. It wasn't perfection or anything, and we allow for emotion, obviously, I mean, sports is competitive and you're doing a lot of investing, you're going to be emotional. So, but he adjusted himself, to understand that fire, was something that he could use for himself or it could be used against him. And that's what happens when you have favor for someone. You give them the lesson as opposed to the penalty. Okay. And so if you believe that God is love and that every person, again, this isn't a biblical lesson, it's just a principle lesson, then I would argue that when it comes to any position of power, you know, having someone's favor is just as important, if not more, than having someone's love. Okay. And so it goes in relationships. When I said before that you can love somebody's dirty draws, okay, that means that love endures and will go a long way through trials, tribulations, misunderstandings, and arguments, right? But if likability becomes an ongoing issue, because there is something in another person that makes them unlikable, then eventually that person will surmise that despite my love for this person, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Okay. And think about it this way. Couples go on vacation, right? You see people, when they're together, they go on vacation. Um, they go get a hotel for the weekend, they take a trip, go overseas or whatever, right? Or, like if they got kids, okay, we're gonna get away and spend some alone time. Or, they have a date night, right? They do hiking together, whatever, right? They don't do that. They don't do that to increase the love. They do it to increase the like. Okay. The love is already there. The issue is we need to go back to where we first started, where we liked each other, we dated, we kicked it, we laughed, we joked, right? Those things are to increase the likability. That is to, again, not to endure, because that's what love does. It's to enjoy, which is what like does, right? So, hey, let's get away. Let's enjoy a fine meal. Let's just go to the movies. Let's do a trip. Let's have some adventures, right? And so that's going to again increase your likability, your enjoyment, your favor, right? It's to put yourselves in an atmosphere, again, where you return to your first love, right? Where before you decided to love, you liked, and you liked a lot, and you liked a lot because of the initial part of your relationship. There was no pressures added to your activities, right? You had your bills, right? She had her bills, you had your bills, or vice versa, right? And you kept all that drama away, and you just did the fun shit, right? Y'all, y'all was just doing fun shit. You didn't talk about, hey, I gotta pay my light bill or my insurance is coming up. You didn't do none of that when you dated, when you were liking each other, when you were getting to know each other. So the disconnect in relationships isn't necessarily about love. If we are to assume love is present in the first place. Love, is about intention, sacrifice, enduring hard times, right? Like or favor, on the other hand, is about leisure. It's about enjoyment. It's about peace. It's about affirmations and pleasure. Okay. Now, if you got both, then you win in this game of life. You winning in this game of life regarding relationships. If not, eh, you may want to investigate and see what can be done to enhance the favor, if possible. Now, the most mature forms of love are not just there to make you feel good. It's to help you grow by reflecting a loving mirror back to yourself. Okay. And if you're not mature enough to handle that, then that's like, putting you in a position where you can't succeed. Okay. It's like putting you in a supremely luxurious vehicle, but your driving experience is of the basic vehicle. So, if you used to the basic, if you at the black and white stage, then, you don't even know how to roll down the window. You're looking for that handle to be like, roll down the window. You don't know how to start the car because the start is a push button, you know, or you looking for a stick shift when the thing is now in a little thing that you just push the button and it puts it in park, right? So that's what we're talking about in terms of maturity level. And again, love is something, again, it reflects back to you. It's love is a thing that's like there was a quote, I don't it may be James Baldwin, I'm not sure, but it's credited to James Baldwin, where it talks about I love my country so much that I reserve the right to criticize her perpetually. He's talking about America. So again, that's the love is gonna, your partner is gonna know, they're gonna see things about you that you don't recognize. And that love is to help show you yourself. That thing that you may not see that's really super good, that's really super dope. And it's also there to show you the thing that you need to clean up. Okay. And because like we said before, we all got blind spots, right? And the ones closest to you will put a mirror to your face. Okay. And so I'm gonna give you an example of some self-work. and maturity. Okay. Again, it's going to be sports related, but it's not. Okay. So last weekend I had a game, had a few games. I had a baseball game, and then I had four basketball games after that. And when I got up, I was tired. I was exhausted mentally and physically, to be honest with you. And, I know my triggers. Like many of us, when I'm tired, I can be cranky. I can be short. I'm not as mentally sharp either, you know. So I was busy taking care of some things around the house, preparing snacks and stuff, drinks for my day. You know, by the time I got off, I ended up rushing to the baseball game. The drive was extensive, it was like 35 minutes, and that's on a Sunday. Okay. In the meantime, no, I'm rushing to get here on time. I ain't do no breath work. I ain't do no meditation. I was just on 100, trying to make this deadline and not be late. And as I approached the field, after putting on my uniform and equipment, I felt the stress in my body, and I was like, okay, I felt this tension, almost like the Terminator, you know what I mean? Like I'm just getting ready for battle. And then in the back of my mind, I thought to myself, these players you're about to umpire, they're 9 years old. And for many of them, this is the most important day of the week. They got their uniforms on, they got the family members watching. It's the beginning of the season. And you know what? The fact that I did not do my inner prep work was not their fault. Therefore, I should be careful to mind my attitude and be mindful that I am not at my best. Okay. And when I said that to myself, then my focus changed totally towards just serving those kids. And despite how I felt inside, internally, I intentionally engaged the game, the players, and the coaches as if I had been at my best, right? And it worked. It worked. After the game, the coaches, the players all thanked me with a smile, and several family members approached me as I walked to my car to get my attention. Hey Blue, you know, thank you for your patience. Thanking me for my kind demeanor, toward the youth. He was all just shaking my hand and just say, "Hey, you're really, really patient with the kids. I love the way you talk to them and educate them and stuff like that." And so for me, it was like, okay, cool, mission accomplished, mission accomplished for now, because I still have four men's league basketball games to referee. And if you know how men are, some of them tend to think that referees have a tail like dogs and they can just bark anything at them. Again, they're also very competitive. For them, even for some of these men, it's the most important day of their week, unless they play more than that, more than once a week, because it's the time where they get to be little boys, right? They get to go out there and hoop. They all grown men. They got responsibilities. Most of them got families, but here they get to live the fantasy, right? Get to live their Michael Jordan fantasy. And so, they're going to be competitive too. They're going to be, and they're going to be a little more bold than some 9-year-old kid, right? And so I had to give myself the same talk. I had to give myself the same pep talk, a little bit more so because me and they're just gonna say crazy stuff. And and I gave so I took a couple breaths, and when I had a chance, I was sitting at the scores table before we got started, breathe and thought to myself again the same typical message. And it ended up again, it worked out. Did they bark? Yes. Did a brother end up getting a technical? Yes, he did. A brother got a technical, but trust me, uh he earned it. He really earned it because if I didn't give it to him, it was going to be a disruption to the game. And but the difference was, when he wilded out like he did, and trust me, several of these cats was wilding out, but I dealt with them calmly, professionally. A couple times I bucked up at them, but it wasn't out of like anger where I was reactionary. It was very um it was poised, confident, direct, uncompromising, but it wasn't mean spirited and reactionary. Okay. So it ended up working out. And so even though I wasn't at my best, I was able to get out of there without embarrassing myself, without letting my attitude uh, be a reflection, on myself and on the contest. So, they end up being a successful day, of work, both mentally and spiritually. And next time, I'm just going to manage my time better, get up a little bit earlier so my mind will be right. And, I'll be in a proper headspace to where I don't have to have that talk. It'll just be within me. Now, that's the example of what I'm talking about of growth and maturity. That's work. And imagine not being a self-aware in your relationships or just crapping on people because you're in a bad mood, because you didn't get enough rest. Like that's everybody else's problem. And it's not, you know, let alone if you're not willing to listen to someone who you so-called love, who's trying to, make you aware or check you, in love. And if you refuse to acknowledge or apologize, or you just go straight to gaslighting and deflection, hey man, you can't admit that you was tripping. I mean, that's what we talking about, right? Black and white, SD, HD, but if you don't know your own triggers, then God help the people around you. And if you're not a person who can, who is constantly considering your growth and evaluating yourself and then getting feedback from those closest to you, from those you love in this case, then that likability is going to wane. That likability is going to wane. So I hope that makes sense. Again, so my summation is uh that it's not about like love is a strong thing. It'll get you there. Love alone will not keep you there. You gotta have some like. You gotta have some favor. And I believe where love exists, where true love truly exists, what makes the love go is a lack of favor. And when you lose favor, again, the person says, man, I'm not enjoying this anymore. I'm not, there's no gratification. Uh, I remember, man, I'm gonna give you this last example. It's kind of weird, kind of wild rather, but I remember I belonged to this church. And I'm gonna tell you, I had love for this church. I had love for the people. I had love for the pastor, like the whole setup. But when I it got to a point where the vibe and the stuff coming from the pastor's mouth was so raggedy, wackety, whack, so degrading, so dismissive, so authoritarian that it got to the point where I would come in happy and leave sad. I'd come in happy and leave grieved, you know? And so what happened? I still love the church. I still loved where I was going. I had a lot of great memories. I even had some assistance, spiritually. I there was some growth and development in me in that church, but I was miserable. So I had to step. I had to walk away. And it's funny how I think about it now is because all of my friends felt the same way. Like all of them to a T felt the same way. I was just the first one to do it, even though they all like encouraged me not to. They wanted me to pray for them, and pray about it and blah, blah, blah. No, it was disturbing my peace. It was bad for me. So I had to step away. So again, my love didn't have nothing to do with it, but the favor left, you know, uh, all those good things that make the experience enjoyable left. And it became the opposite of enjoyable. It became detrimental. It became damaging. Okay. So I had to step away for my own mental and spiritual health, right? And I'm like, shoot, why am I? Why am I putting myself through this? You know what I'm saying? At some point, it ain't their fault. It's your fault if you keep participating in it. So as I close again, that's I just want you to relate this back 10,000 foot view to relationships. Love endures, like enjoys, and you cannot underestimate the power of like or the currency of favor. Favor. I like this kid. I like this woman. You know, yeah, I know you ain't perfect. You got your shit, but you know what? I like you. This stuff, it'll go a long way. So that's my time. I thank you for yours. Again, please like, subscribe, do all the things, including the comments, and let me know what you think. And we'll talk soon. Peace.